Well, back on Open Exchange, of course, more than 700,000 matriculants across the country will be writing their, or starting their final exams today. We're joined now by Brad Brockman of Equal Education. He's the General Secretary. Graham Bloch, who's an education analyst in Johannesburg with us. And back in Cape Town with Brad is Nicholas Spall, who is researcher at the Department of Economics at Stellenbosch. Let's start with you, Nicholas, and let's just check on that report that you've put out. Perhaps a good place to start our discussion. And perhaps if I could throw at you that the problem in our education system is certainly not matric.
Yes, thanks, David. So the focus of the report was to look at the crisis that we have in education and to figure out why we have it. And I think what a lot of people don't recognize when they look at these matric results, and as you say, the matrics are writing this week coming, is that of 100 children that start school in grade 1, only 50 will actually make it to matric. Most of the students will drop out in grade 10 and 11. Around 40 will pass, and only 12 will qualify to go to university. So when we talk of the matric results, we really are only speaking about half of the cohort. The other half has already dropped out in grade 10 and 11. And I think the main finding from the report is that the problems come in primary school. It's not in secondary school. It's that these children are acquiring learning deficits in primary school, and those learning deficits accumulate over time until they become insurmountable.
Nicholas, perhaps what is the key recommendation that you've given from that report that could adequately address this problem of pupils falling through the cracks in primary school?
Well, I think it needs to be a focus on foundational numeracy and literacy in the foundation phase. So that's grade 1, 2, and 3. And that we need to look at three areas mainly. The first one is the capacity of teachers to teach. So that's got to do with what teachers know and also how they teach it. And then also the accountability systems that we have in place in our basic education system, whether that's looking at teachers, district officials, provincial officials. We need to have a match between accountability on the one hand and capacity on the other hand if we want to improve the situation. And teacher content knowledge and pedagogy is a good place to start.
Well, there do seem to be some serious problems with the teachers. Your research also shows, Nicholas, that among grade 6 teachers, I think your phrase is a high proportion, they can't answer the questions which they ask of their own pupils in class. Now, that's an obvious, serious problem which could be addressed. But Brad, you're a General Secretary of Equal Education. Every time we talk about these matric exams and their results and the system as a whole, we are reminded that there is no way that education can be equal in South Africa under these conditions.
That's correct, David, and that's what we as Equal Education see as the fundamental problem with the education system, is that essentially, as Nick has shown us through research, is that we actually have two public education systems. We have one well-resourced, well-functioning education system which caters to about the wealthiest 20 to 25% of students, and then you have 75 to 80% of poor and working class children who are going to schools that are under-resourced, that are under-financed, where their teachers are not as well qualified and trained, and those schools produce very, very poor outcomes. So what we have is that the education system is actually perpetuating social inequality, and unless we address this situation directly, we will have a situation where poor children will continue to have access to education which does not take them out of poverty.
Of course, I see Graham nodding emphatically here in Johannesburg, so I'll let you get your nods in. But perhaps you can also fast forward to the 12% that do matriculate, and let's look at their transition into the tertiary space. What are the key challenges there, and why are we finding that once they make it into tertiary, a big number of them also never graduate?
Well, I think that I'm nodding because the key challenges are what we're hearing. And kids are not doing maths and science, and it's massive inequalities, both racial and class. Actually, and maybe the correspondents are not saying racial hard enough, because basically 60% of white kids, of whom 100% pass matric, or 98% pass matric, go on to university, 60%, versus about 11 or 12% of black kids. And we're learning that inequality is totally unsustainable. So I think we need to focus on matric teachers, but we also need to focus on inequality. And if you ask the question, what is the transition is that we need brilliant scientists. We need to solve AIDS, malaria. We need to look at the southern stars, which the north is not going to do for us. And unless we get the best, we're going to be in trouble.
Dave took me on earlier. We had a very brief discussion about this, and I was quite clear that I feel that we also don't have the required leadership for an education portfolio, which in my view is as important as finance and other really big ministries. What is your view in terms of the leadership capacity?
Well, let's just tell them what our disagreement was.
Well,
you said the minister was useless.
I think the minister should go, and I probably think that the guys in Cape Town might just agree with me. So if I can get you to agree as well, that means it's all four of us
but
against
let's tell
one.
them first why I disagree. I think the problem is not at strategic level. In fact, there are more than enough policies and solutions that we put out. It's at delivery level. It's in the rural area under the provincial education departments. And Nicholas, I don't know if your research has picked up on that. The regional, and I think you certainly do highlight, for example, where the Eastern Cape is so far behind a province like Gauteng in outcomes.
Yes. Definitely, and I think it's important to, as Brad mentioned, talk about the inequalities that we have. So if we look at the SACMEC study, which looked at grade 6, we see that while only 5% of children in the Western Cape were functionally illiterate, i.e. they couldn't read for meaning, in Limpopo that figure was 50%. So 1 in every 2 children couldn't read for meaning after 6 years of formal full-time schooling. But as you mentioned earlier, the problem really lies with implementation. Often we have first world policies, but we implement them in a third world way. And I think that part of the blame does have to go to the Department of Basic Education, but we also need to recognize that under Minister Mocheka, there have been a number of moves in the right direction. Things like the annual national assessments, the curriculum assessment policy statement, and the workbooks, all of which are definite moves in the right direction, even though we are still stuck with this ongoing crisis.
It seems as if, though, if I may come to you, Brad, that at the center of the education crisis in South Africa is accountability, because even with the inspections that need to be happening at a school level, we find tremendous resistance to these from the unions. From that point of view, where do you think we stand on an accountability front?
I think that it's helpful when we talk about accountability to think of it not only from a top-down perspective, but also from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is that from the top down, you need, as a National Department of Basic Education, to set policies, to set regulations, and to ensure that provincial education departments, that they actually deliver the quality of education that they meant to. So that's a national function. And a provincial function is that the provincial education departments and the districts, that they need to manage their employees. But as equal education, what we think is also crucial is that students and parents themselves assert their rights to a basic quality education, and that they know and understand what they are entitled to, and that they are able to hold teachers, hold principals to account and participate in structures such as school governing bodies, for example. So when we look at accountability, we need to look at it across all spheres of the system, and we also have to look at it as though students and parents also have a role, in addition to the role that government has to play as the employer.
Graham, just, we don't want to be here. We will probably be here next year this time saying the same things. It's a discussion that's been going on for a long time, and we know what the problems are. It seems to me the way the problem is talked about is a problem. So the focus is on matric, and they say if the pass rate goes up from 62% to 64%, this is a wonderful thing. In fact, it should be 100%. Because everyone who passes into matric, who has been promoted into matric, should be capable of passing matric. So you might get the odd brainstorm somewhere, but it should be a 99% pass rate. The problem is not matric, and it's lower down. What are the obstacles to fixing it?
Look, delivery is not an issue where you don't need a provincial MEC to do their job. And they need to be hands-on. And we've seen in the provinces like Gauteng and Western Cape, where it works, the MEC is busy or every day and is on the job. So I think that's part of the issue. And I think the other obstacles are our own success. You know that if you're a good maths person, you rather become an accountant because you can pay for your parents
Right.
than become a maths teacher. So some of the issues are difficult to solve and will take a long time.
One of the developments that I've seen in the industry is a more prominent role by business, and we've seen these education trusts headed up by Sizwe Masana coming to the fore. Do you think businesses gotten to a point where they want to see real return on their investment now and are taking a more leading role in driving the education outcomes?
I think business is very important, and I think it's hands-on again. It's like actually understanding that you need to work where you are for a long time. And it used to be that you just went in, dipped in, and thought that you were going to do a policy issue and a policy correction. But now it's understanding by business that they've got to build models that work.
Nicholas, to what extent has your research exposed the resistance, the obstacles in the system? We've mentioned the unions. I mean, this remarkable thing that the government cannot inspect, cannot monitor, because the union refuses. Union refuses to sit tests, which are designed to find out competence of teachers. Surely this is this the greatest obstacle? If that could be sorted out, would we move faster?
I think it's definitely one of the obstacles, and most education researchers agree that the professionalism of the teacher unions is one of the core problems that we have in the country. How we fix that is a different question. I think that demonizing teachers is popular at the moment, but I don't think that it's particularly helpful. Teachers need to be held accountable for the work that they're doing, but they also need to be provided with opportunities to increase their capacity such that they can actually do their jobs. Many of these teachers were trained under apartheid, and the in-service training that they've received since then has been of exceedingly low quality. That's never been evaluated. So to hold them accountable for something that they cannot do is problematic. So I think it's both. We need to improve the capacity of teachers, but teacher unions also need to come to the table and start talking about professionalism. How do we raise the teaching skills of our teaching force?
I perhaps want to come back to you, Graham, and back at the tertiary level and look at how FETs actually fare against universities. It seems as if from an image perspective, students don't want to go to or be associated with FETs. They want to be associated with a traditional university.
And they used to be technical colleges, which had a reasonably good brand.
It's not just the image, it's also the reality, which
Right.
is that FET colleges don't do as well as universities.
But what happened
and
to
if
them?
you can
Why
get
did
a
they
job,
deteriorate?
well, they haven't deteriorated. They're just not doing properly, and we actually are looking at them for the first time. So I think that's part of the issue, is that at least education is a national priority, and at least organizations like Equal Education are mobilizing young people to say something about education.
Yeah, and I suppose what's happening is that the market talks in the way that parents send their children to schools where they will be educated better than the local one perhaps, and they try to get into university because it's seen, and maybe is, on the whole, a better prospect than those technical colleges. Well, thanks to Brad Brockman. It's a big discussion. We haven't really more than scratched the surface, but it's been great to have him, General Secretary of Equal Education. Graham Bloch in Johannesburg, Education Analyst, and in Cape Town as well. Nicholas Spoor, researcher at Stellenbosch University.